Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Petrilli, president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and on behalf of Fordham and the National Association of Gifted Children, who is co-sponsoring this with us, as well as the American Federation of Teachers and AASA, I want to welcome you to this great webinar today. We're going to talk about a new Fordham study by my colleague Adam Tyner called The Broken Pipeline: Advanced Education Policies at the Local Level. Adam's going to give us a very brief overview of that. You can, of course, dig into it on your own time. And then we've got an excellent panel here to discuss the findings and more broadly about the state of advanced education today and what we can do to continue to try to make advanced education a pipeline that is broader and wider, that is serving every American child that's ready to do advanced level work, regardless of their background. So that's what the plan is today. So again, we're going to start with Adam, go for about 10 minutes, then we'll have a panel discussion, and along the way, we'll bring in your comments. If you've got them, we're doing it really easy peasy today. We didn't get super fancy with the Zoom. You just put them in the chat, and we will collect them and make sure we don't lose any of them, and we'll start peppering the panel with those questions as we go. Okay, so thanks so much for being here. And with that brief introduction, let me head it over to Adam Tyner, who is a member of our research team at Fordham and has done a lot of great work on advanced education, among other issues. Adam, tell us what you found.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Today I'm just going to be sharing the results from a big survey that we've been conducting over the last couple of years. We've been working on this project. And just sharing some of the results from our report that we put out just a few weeks ago. I just realized that I don't know whether I have control of this or Luna does. Okay, thanks, Luna. You'll just advance as I go here. So just a word about how we conducted this survey and what exactly is in it. We worked to survey school districts. And so the respondents to the survey were district administrators that we identified who had in their portfolio advanced education, gifted education, or related stuff. Sometimes it was just the superintendent or an assistant superintendent who had an academic portfolio. But these are district staff who are telling us about the policies in their district. It was meant to be nationally representative of large and medium districts. So these are districts that have about 1,500 students. So that may seem kind of small on the small end, but actually there's lots of tiny districts around the country. And so those are excluded. It's just nationally representative of those large, medium, and medium to small districts with about that many students, about 1,500 students is the bottom cutoff. We also use some other data in conjunction with this, some publicly available information about the districts. And we also did something as part of this. Of course, we're asking the districts about their policies with regard to advanced education. And that includes gifted education and other advanced programs in early grades, as well as stuff in upper grades, stuff like AP and other policies that are related to advanced education throughout the K-12 pipeline. But after asking all of these kind of nuanced questions about identification for programs, what kind of services are offered, and all of that stuff, we went ahead and kind of tried to come up with an index that would let us have a kind of a big picture view of how comprehensive the policies in a given district were. And so we assigned points to the policies kind of in alignment with our working group on advanced education report that came out a few months ago to kind of say, okay, this place is doing a great job. They've got great policies with regard to identification and lots of different services, good teacher supports, and we give you a lot of points. And what that allows us to do is then compare the scores for districts, looking at different types of districts and being able to compare them more holistically. So you'll see a little bit of that in just a second as well. Go ahead and advance, Luna. Thanks. So the first finding in this report, and of course the entire report is available at fordhaminstitute.org. I'm just going to talk about some key findings and just a little bit of flavor for each one of those. The first finding is that the advanced policies in America's school districts are kind of mediocre. Now, if you look, this is that index that I'm talking about here. And you can see as the score here goes from 0 to 1,000. So you could have gotten 1,000 points on this, but the typical district, the median district in the survey just scores about half on that index. So they're getting about half of the policies right, or getting about half of the policies that we'd most recommend. There's very few districts that are doing nothing right. Most of them are doing something well, and there's very few districts that are really getting everything where we would like it. Now, to kind of dig into what those policies are, we'll go ahead and look at the next slide. And we'll look at some of these individual policies and what we reported. First, we'll talk about identification policies. Good identification policies, such as universal screening, are common, but most districts do not adopt a lot of other best practices, including using local norms. So this figure here shows that the large majority of districts are screening students universally, at least in one grade, using some kind of a standardized assessment. That's good news. Unfortunately, sometimes there's not a whole lot of on-ramps. There's just 1 or 2 grades that they're screening in like that. If you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Luna. You can see the kind of norms that you have to meet. So when I say norms, what I mean is, do you have to be in the top 5% nationally, or just the top 5% in your classroom or in your school or in your district? So the norms you can see is generally we're using national norms. About 57% of districts using national norms, and just 20% of districts using district norms, 20% using school norms, school-based norms, top 10% or top 5% or something like that. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Finding 3 is that advanced programming in most elementary and middle schools is pretty limited. You can see the predominant form of service that is offered is part-time pull-out classes. And we all know that those could be really excellent, or they could be very little. But what I think was a little bit more concerning, and what made me think that there's a lot of it is of kind of questionable value, is how rare it is that you have special courses and classrooms and schools for advanced learners. It's very much more common to have just in-class differentiation in general classrooms, or cluster grouping of students with in-class differentiation. Those are much more common forms of service provision for advanced students in elementary schools. Go to the next one, Luna. Finding 4 is that most high schools are offering substantial advanced programming, although it's possible that students are lacking access to it in some cases if they don't meet prerequisites. You can see here that, and this is based on publicly available federal data, that just 11% of districts are offering no honors courses at all. I'm sorry, this is actually from our survey, but it's very common to offer some honors courses in high school. Go to the next slide, Luna. And then looking at that federal data, just 16% of districts are offering, having no students enrolled in AP at all. So AP and honors is very prevalent, at least when you're looking at the district level. We know, of course, that there's lots of variation within districts with regard to what's offered. This was a district survey, and at least at the district level, this stuff is not quite universal, but close to it. Next slide, please. Just kind of one thing about the prerequisites. It's the most common prerequisites are to need to have completed a prior course, earning a high grade in a prior course, or getting a recommendation. But you can see that about 1/3 of districts have no prerequisites for advanced placement. You can go to the next one, Luna. And the 5th finding goes back to the index I was talking about earlier. How well do they score when you look at all the policies that we would most recommend overall? And one thing that is kind of interesting is that we don't really see much of a pattern for different types of districts. So when we look at this by poverty level of the district, by the racial composition of the district, or by the size of the district, we don't see that there's, one type of district has really good scores on the index, meaning they have really comprehensive policies on this stuff, and another type doesn't. You can see here, when we look at the quartile, so that's the poorest fourth of districts, those middle districts, and then the richest fourth of districts. There's really not much difference on the score here. I think all these differences, to the extent that they exist, aren't statistically significant anyway. And if you go to the next slide, I think you'll see this by district enrollment. And you can see that, can you go back one more? Thanks. And you can see that the largest districts do have slightly more comprehensive policies maybe, but it's really not that different. And really, barely statistically significant. So really just looking at a district's demographics doesn't tell you much about how comprehensive the district's policies are. So I think that, Luna, is that my last one? Yeah, so I think that kind of wraps up. I think we'll have an opportunity to dig into other findings and dig into this more granularly in our discussion. But that's most of what we found in this big new survey of school districts.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. That was great. So really to summarize and why we went with this imagery around the broken pipeline, what Adam is finding here is that there's actually a lot of good things happening in the very, very early grades in terms of universal screening, right? That we see most districts are at least reporting that they are using some kind of test to universally screen all kids to identify them for advanced education or gifted education. But then we're not seeing a whole lot actually happening in those elementary schools or even in middle school. The services that we're providing to the kids who are identified seem to be pretty limited and maybe mediocre. Then we get to high school and there's a whole bunch of activity again, where there's been this big push to have advanced placement programs especially, but also international baccalaureate, dual enrollment. So kids ready for a lot of advanced courses increasingly have those opportunities. But the pipeline is broken because we haven't actually done much between early elementary and high school to prepare kids to succeed in those AP classes. That is particularly the case for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, kids of color. And so the question is, can we do more, especially in those elementary schools and middle schools, to help kids prepare for the greater challenge that they may now have a chance to take once they get to high school? Okay, so with that, I am now going to move us into small group discussions. This is exciting. This is a little bit, well, I don't exactly know how this is going to go, but my colleague Luna is going to magically press some buttons and send us into small groups just for about 5 minutes. This is going to be, facilitate, moderate on your own here if you can. Somebody take charge. And just have a quick discussion here so that you can connect with one another. What in here surprised you, if anything, from these findings? Luna, you want to work your magic? And if you see an invitation to join a room, click join. We'll see you on the other side. Okay. Well, that was fun. We had a great conversation in our group. I hope that you did as well. Uh, Now, a little hint here. I notice on my screen, if you go to view and you go side by side speaker, you'll have a chance to see our panel as Luna highlights them as we move into the panel discussion. So we're going to continue this conversation. And again, I'm super excited to have this great panel with us today. Let me briefly introduce them. Shoot, now I'm not seeing them anymore on my screen. Okay, let's see, side by side speakers. Okay, here they come. All right, so first of all, Dr. Shari Camhi, the superintendent of the Baldwin Union Free School District in New York. Dr. Camhi, welcome, and thanks for being here. I understand Dr. Camhi is also in the National Assessment Governing Board, and it's great to have you provide a practitioner perspective. Dr. Randi Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. Randi, we really appreciate you being here as well. Looking forward to your comments. And Dr. Shelagh Gallagher, president of the National Association for Gifted Children. Let's jump right in. And if you don't mind, Luna, let's go back to the slide around finding three about elementary schools, because I really want to dig into that. Let me start with you, Randi. You know, we were just talking in our small group. It really feels like there's a lot of momentum around advanced coursework in high school, you know, and from the left, right, and center, you know, you see equity advocates saying we need equitable access to AP and dual enrollment, international baccalaureate. It seems to be there's a comfort with the idea that once you get to high school, there should be these advanced courses, but there's not the same comfort in the earlier grades. You know, and when we see things happening, it's these, you know, pull-out programs, it's these telling teachers, well, you've got to, quote, differentiate instruction. We don't see a lot of support for example, letting kids, I don't know, if they're in third grade, being able to do fourth grade level math if they're ready for it, or having, you know, separate classes where they can spend a big chunk of the day moving at the pace they're ready for it. How do you make sense of that? And when you talk to teachers, I'm just curious, like, my sense is when you tell a teacher, well, your job with this group of kids that might be, you know, from first grade level to eighth grade level in reading or math, you're supposed to differentiate instruction, is that they roll their eyes and they say, you know,
yeah.
You try to tell me. What's your perspective?
So part of the reason I wanted to do the panel, my goal is that I am really glad for these I mean, I'm not glad for the results, but I'm glad that it's been lifted up. I think we kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater when, in the name of equity, all these gifted programs were thrown out in elementary and middle schools. We should have been doing more access in a more equitable way, have more, not less. And so there'd be access for more Black and brown kids who are, you know, who with opportunity would do fantastically well, as you can now see in all the AP and dual enrollment programs. So people are proving that, but we threw a lot of these things out. So, and now we're just trying to create some, as you can see from this finding, you know, all sorts of hybrid models, and just throwing things together and not even giving teachers the PD that they need. So this is one of those things where, in the name of equity, we actually did something that was pretty unequal. We should have actually had more advanced learning opportunities for gifted students, or for advanced learning opportunities in elementary schools and in high schools. And I would push hard to revisit this question again based upon this. I think the resistance, let me just say one more thing, the resistance is people these days, and you and I know this, have been through this, as have the superintendents on this panel, is that, you know, somebody then says you were being X and Y and Z, and it chills the conversation instead of saying, oh no, there's another way of doing it. Mm-hmm. So there's a resistance to being called out for not being equitable, and yet it will be more equitable to Black and brown kids if we gave them more of these advanced learning opportunities.
Right. Randi, do you think it's it's partly the terminology. I mean, you'll notice we try here to talk
Yes.
about advanced education, not gifted education, because it's, we suspect the gifted education has a lot of baggage, but is that all that it is, do you think, or is there something more?
Well, you know, I'm sure that you and I are not used to agreeing with each other as much as we're agreeing with each other today. But yes, I do think that there's that the language got very charged, and it was perceived as the gifted programs were for white kids and not for Black and brown kids. And I would also say the point about national norms versus local norms, and actually having norms that include more than testing, is really, really important, because testing has an adverse effect many times, whereas the specialness of kids, you could see in lots of different ways of assessing them. As you know, I'm a very big believer in experiential learning and in project-based learning, and in taking the specialness of kids tinkering and actually moving it to the critical thinking and projects and things like that. And so I think that this study that Adam has done has raised a lot of questions, having data that we should have more local norms, and there should be much less resistance to actually broadening out what we call advanced learning.
Okay, great. Thank you, Randi. Sheila, let's keep going on some of these same topics here. So we're looking at this finding right now around what is happening in elementary school. From your perspective, what should be happening in elementary school? I mean, what do we want to see happen for kids who are ready for greater challenge in elementary school?
Well, really what we want to see depends on how advanced the child is, right? I think one of the things that we struggle with is that there's a lot of attention being paid, as you mentioned, to differentiation in the regular classroom. And that's fine for kids who just need a boost every once in a while. And we don't want teachers to stop differentiating. But teachers have to understand what differentiating up means as opposed to differentiation that's for everybody. And that's the first piece. But the second piece is that's not really right for all advanced students. Somebody who's substantially above the norm, and especially if you've got a group of kids, they need the right dose of the right medicine. So they need to have the environment where they can work together and push each other forward with a teacher who knows how to build those advanced schools. And they need something more that's just lesson by lesson. They need a coordinated curriculum that begins somewhere and takes them over time to a new place so that they can see their thinking evolve and they're getting constantly pushed forward. And I just think that there's a lot of struggle around that. And Randi has mentioned some of the reasons why. In our small group, Jennifer was talking about the reasons why, that there's this tinge of elitism around this. And I think that gets exacerbated when there's no equitable access, and Randi articulated that so well. But I also think that when the curriculum is not authentically challenging enough, that people don't understand that there's a reason why those kids are going to a different place, and it's because it's harder. I think we also do programs a disservice. But Michael, I just want to say one more thing if I can, because I think there's a systemic problem that is sort of the elephant in the room. And I'm very curious to know how Shari and Randi in particular would respond to this. Because I think one of the problems that we're dealing with is that teachers, administrators, counselors, none of them are required to have any professional learning about gifted students before they enter the profession. And I think this has a multitude of negative impacts, all the way from myths being conveyed about advanced placement being damaging to kids or acceleration being damaging to kids, to bad referrals, teachers not knowing who needs to be referred, and perhaps some bias in the referral process. And it just seems, administrators don't know why they need to have a program in their Title I school. And it seems to me that if we took care of that foundation, then we'd all have a place to start the conversation so that we all understood what the aims of the programs are and how to implement them well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, yes, you go right for the elephant, the ed schools, right? And how do we fix that issue? But it's certainly true that many, well, I'll put it this way, very few teachers report having had much training, any coursework at all, really, in
Yeah.
serving advanced learners, right? And if they get some exposure, oftentimes it's pretty negative, right? Their professors telling them that, like Randi said, that, well, gifted education is, you know, the conventional wisdom, it's elitist, it's for the white kids, it's supposed to be something to be opposed, rather than say, how do we flip that on its head and get many more kids into these kinds of opportunities?
So if I could jump in,
Please.
I think I'd like to offer just a different lens by which to look at the topic. And I think it's important to know from the outset, the school system that I'm superintendent of is 85% Black and Hispanic. And so, and a high school graduation rate of 99%, with about 95% of our kids going off to college. I mean, in numbers, that's impressive. But what is different about what we're doing, and what I hope that we redefine this notion of advance to, is fundamentally what we ask students to engage in, the learning opportunities for our kids, has to be the type of learning that that makes giftedness flourish. And I think, to Randi's point, and I agree with Randi, that all of our kids learn differently, they are excited differently, but the learning we put in front of them matters. And that ties into what Sheila said as well, right? Not only are our teachers don't come to us knowing gifted education, they come to us with 2 classes of literacy and 1 class of math. I mean, none of that is okay. If you're an elementary teacher, you should be a literacy expert, you should be a math expert, but you should also have deep, dirty hands when it came to science, and really brilliant when it comes to civics and social studies, and all of that. In my opinion, there's some room for improvement. But I want to give you an example. This morning I was in an elementary school. It happened to be 5th grade across the district, all 5th graders, and they had been engaging on a study of the environment and its effects on everything. They integrated social studies into this. They integrated technology through Spheros Ball, so programming. They used protocols to go deep into the content area. There's this amazing picture of what learning looked like. And you can call it gifted, you can call it advanced, but what I'll call it is deep learning. And whether you are a good book learner, if you're a good recaller, if you are more of a student who likes to think and conjecture, the opportunities for learning were there for everybody. And so instead of siphoning kids off as gifted, not gifted, advanced, not advanced, for me, it's really all about creating learning opportunities that allow every single student to go deep. Because I think historically we define this based on an assessment. And being somebody that doesn't like taking traditional assessments, didn't particularly do well in traditional assessments, I don't think that's how you find giftedness. Mm-hmm. And at the secondary level, particularly at the high school level, when you look at some of the newer AP programs that were really guided by IB, it wasn't about what score you got on a test. For example, AP Seminar is this phenomenal class. It's a phenomenal class. And it's all about what you know, how much you know, what your thinking behind what you know is. And I think we cannot forget being able to tell the difference between true and fake information, which is, in my opinion, the most important skill our kids need before they graduate.
No, and I'm so glad that you mentioned this idea of, rather than you are gifted or you're not gifted, you're advanced, you're not advanced. This study follows on the heels of a national working group on advanced education that we commissioned at Fordham last year. And, this was one of the big themes, and one of the big recommendations is really to think of it as a continuum, right? And you're trying to, it's personalized learning is basically all it is, right? You're trying to match the needs of the kid with the services. And, sometimes that's going to mean, you've got a kid who is ready to, accelerate 3 grade levels, right? That's unusual, but that could happen, right? In other cases, it's a matter of, trying to find a way to capture the interest of a child that can happen within a traditional classroom setting. And as you said, Dr. Camhi, as you provide this kind of enrichment and great curriculum and great learning for everybody, then you can start to figure out who might need more. It's all just providing, who's ready for more, give them more, right? I'm sorry, Randy, go ahead. You were going to say something?
No, I think, Michael, I think on some levels, we're all both saying the same thing and have some slight differences, which is first off, I love being at Shari's district last year. I was only there for a couple of nanoseconds, but I love being there and seeing a lot of the deeper learning that was going on and the intentionality around that. And that, and it's part of the reason that, I've really talked these days all the time about not just career tech ed, but experiential learning and project-based, because you can get all 3 of these very key strategies, the discernment between true, misinformation, disinformation, and accurate information, regardless of what you think about that information, critical thinking, communication, and also the relational work of being a sentient individual in this, in this world. And I think that kind of deeper learning that I saw at Baldwin does a lot of those things. I think what we're talking about, though, is that should be the norm for all kids. I mean, we should really be doing that kind of deep dive with all kids, particularly starting, as early as possible. We're in a different place in the United States, in the world. This to prepare kids for life, career, college, and civic engagement. It's no longer about memorization. It is really about understanding nuance and critical thinking, and actually understanding how to be a human being and dealing with conflict and all of that and all of those aspects. So I think that schooling itself has to look much more like what Shari is saying. But I think also what Sheila and I are saying, and as well, is that there is a cohort of young people that need specialness in different kinds of ways. And it's not one kid, it's not 2 kids, it is a cohort of kids. Mm-hmm. And it is not, and there should not be a racial bias for it or class bias for it. In public education, we should do this for all those kids who are in that, in these cohorts. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're saying as well. But the point that Sheila made, and I don't think is that, or at least as I understood it, is, look, I was a lawyer before I was a teacher. I never took a class on gifted education. I wouldn't know how to understand it. And I do think that we should incentivize and align the work that teachers do, whether it's before they become teachers or in those first 5 years. We should find ways that these clear instructional strategies are available for people in terms of professional development.
Yep. Let me bring in a couple of the questions from the chat. Again, if you've got a question, please put it in, send it in, and it'll get to me. There's a couple here about acceleration, right? And that is a word that we use in a lot of different contexts these days. I think in this context, in the world of gifted education, advanced education, it has a specific meaning, which is allowing students to accelerate to material that might be above grade level, right? Or what we used to call skipping a grade, right? And that you could do that maybe for all your subjects, or in some cases, maybe just for one. You've got a child who's, super precocious in math, and so that you let them, they're in 2nd grade, but for math class, they sit in the 3rd grade classroom. Unfortunately, though, if you look again at this slide that's up on our screens, it might be too small on your screen, but if you zoom in on it and you say, okay, how many places are allowing acceleration by content area, like the one I just described for math, it's 4%, okay? And acceleration by grade in terms of everybody, it's 0%. Schools hate this, right? There's this big bias against letting kids, quote, skip a grade. And somebody's asking why. Like somebody says here in a comment, 7 grade levels of differentiation can't occur effectively within one classroom, right? That's based on a finding that I think it was a 6th grade classroom had something like 7 grade levels represented because of kids being so far above or below grade level. So why not use computer adaptive interim assessment data to provide automatic enrollment for every individual student at the curriculum level that they're ready for? So in other words, if they're ready, if they're way above grade level, let them go sit in the 4th grade class. So I'd love your perspective on that. Maybe start with you, Sheila, maybe Dr. Camhi, but first of all, like what Sheila, this is one of these practices that has so much evidence behind it over the years. You might talk about that. And then again, why the resistance to this?
Just one point of clarification, if I can, Mike.
Yeah.
The figure that we're looking at here is showing the predominant mode of service provision for students in elementary schools. It's not saying that these are allowed or not allowed.
Okay.
So actually, almost half of districts report allowing acceleration by content area, for example.
Okay.
Although that's still a minority of districts.
Okay, but it's not common, is what you're saying. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Sheila?
I think this is one of the areas that we struggle with the most in terms of misinformation, that there is a great deal of concern from well-intentioned administrators and teachers that if a child accelerates, it's going to do them harm psychologically or socially. And the evidence is really clear. There's a wonderful report, it's a little old now, but the data is still good, called A Nation Deceived, where they synthesized the research on acceleration. And they have documented that if the decisions are made carefully and on a case-by-case basis, taking all of these factors into account, that you can accelerate and the child will thrive. It's not for everybody, but the option ought to be there for those kids who are ready for it. Because educating the mind is part of educating the whole child. And some children actually need that exposure to advanced content and older peers in order to learn how to operate socially in the world as well as intellectually. So, but it is, it's one of those pervasive myths that in the absence of any information provided early on in someone's career, any information is what they learn. So we want to give them the appropriate information at the appropriate time so that everybody understands what the benefits are. I would also like to give a shout out to my colleagues at the Bell and Blank Center at the University of Iowa, who have done a great job creating guidelines around acceleration and workbooks that people can use in order to guide the acceleration decision-making process. So there are resources available to teachers that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago that are really very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That is great. Dr. Camhi, how do you think about this issue, about students who might be ready for material that's above their grade level, especially, let's say, in elementary school?
Yeah, so, personally, I have to say that, I skipped 7th grade, and I have to say it was a godsend to skip 7th grade. It was a whole bunch of content I did not have to go through, or it was shoved in somewhere else. But, I think for me, there's 2 areas to focus on. One is, structure always gets in the way. And I think what you point out is an issue of structure. And policy doesn't help us here either, right? So if schools continue to be structured by grade and by age, doing the work that you're talking about is just hard. Not impossible, but it's hard. That structure gets in the way. But policy is also part of the problem. If everyone says that, we are testing every single child in grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and you're taking your on-grade test, then you're going to want that on-grade content. And that's not to say that kids who are accelerated can't do well on that, but the fear that exists for many school systems and many teachers, there's a teacher of record. So if my child who is in my classroom goes to a different classroom for mathematics, who's the teacher of record? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing this. I'm saying that there are structures and policies in place that make it really hard to do the work that you're talking about. But I think the one thing that makes it the hardest is that across the board, with few exceptions, although there are exceptions and those are growing in number, The methodology that we use is traditional instruction, traditional classrooms, traditional everything. And just being traditional makes it hard. Now, again, not impossible. When you begin to allow your staff and your school systems to think differently and to do things differently, all of a sudden worlds open up and problems that existed before don't exist now. So for us, K through 12, we have something called Baldwin 2035. We are envisioning what if I were to go into a classroom in Baldwin in 2035, I want to see what's happening there. And we are playing with that and doing that work now so that when we get to 2035, it's already happening. That's all about breaking the traditional instruction. It's all about fixing the policies that prevent us from doing what gets in our way. And it's about looking at structure. So for example, one of the things that you had on there is movement between classrooms and movement between grades. And at first, our teachers were terrified of doing that. They are not terrified anymore because we opened it up, we allowed for the experimentation, and they saw real progress and amazing things happen. But it is policy and structure and traditional thinking traditionally that a lot of times gets in the way.
And I would just add, if I may, I would just add one more thing, which is the traditional accountability system, which is so assessment based. Like, what if we went back to grade span testing and look what's happening in terms of high schools, and we went to a performance based graduation requirement as opposed to a test based one? You already see the variety in high schools because of the things that Shari and Sheila and all of us are experiencing. Dual enrollment, 10 years ago was not what dual enrollment is right now. What happens if we did something different so that the accountability system, which I know we need to have, can be a 21st century accountability system as opposed to one that's, in the 20th century, one that's much more envisioned by what Shari was just saying is what kids need to be able to do and know. And so I think that alignment with a newly envisioned accountability system, you've noticed, I'm not saying throw out an accountability system. We just need one that's actually more appropriate for 2024.
Well, Randi, now we're going to start disagreeing about a different topic if we're going to get into accountability, but that's okay. That's why it's fun to have you here, is that we disagree on lots of things and we agree on a few things, and that's good. So let me keep digging in here on this question about preparing for these advanced courses in high school. And Shari, maybe with you, you mentioned this new AP course that in many respects was kind of inspired by what's happening in International Baccalaureate. I mean, there's a lot of angst out there that we have expanded AP and IB and dual enrollment, but there's lots of kids who end up taking these courses and then they take the exams and they don't pass, right? And that we have these big racial disparities or class disparities and who's scoring a 3 or a 4 or a 5 on these tests. And so how can we think about getting kids ready into a pipeline where they're going to be able to do better in these courses, so we're not just waiting till high school?
So for us, it's all about variety. And I'll give you an example of things that we've done. Taking that AP exam, and I defy anyone, for example, to take AP Euro, take that exam and you see how well you do. It's brutal. I would not do well on that. That does not make me not smart. And it does not make me not able to accelerate. So first of all, we have to look at, and I you didn't hear me applauding here, Randi, but I was applauding on what you just said, because I think you were 1,000% right. And our high school is one of 23 schools in the entire state of New York that's going to a pilot on performance-based assessments, and happy to have been chosen to do that. But the example that I gave you in AP seminar is a course that lacks the, quote, traditional assessment. It is more of a performance-based assessment, and our kids do phenomenally well. We have students in our high school that we have a whole cohort of students that are full-time college students on our community college's campus, embedded with college students. They are not a separate cohort. I have had students get 4.0 GPAs in their college courses as high school seniors. So one would have to ask, well, why would I have them still in high school if they're able to do this work in college? So I think what we need to look at is what's the variety? What are the many options that we offer students to allow their quote giftedness, their acceleration, whatever works for them to come out. In Baldwin, we don't have hoops that you have to jump through if you want to take an AP course. So for example, in 9th grade, almost all our students take AP American because it is a really good entree into what it feels like to do accelerated courses. To be honest, I hope they do well on those assessments, but exposing them to that higher level work and getting them cognitively ready to be challenged that way. If they don't do well on the first one, they're going to do well on the second one. But it's all about the assessment. I wouldn't do well on those assessments. So it's about identifying what are the different ways we assess students. It's not always about tests, and it's not always about multiple choice or essay tests. For me, the word test is very different than assessment. A test is one example of an assessment. I want to see what our kids know and understand and are able to do in a really, really deep way.
Great. Hey, Adam, let me get you in here. Can you tell us, when I think about this question, I mean, one obvious thing we should do is in middle school, do we need more advanced courses in middle school that kids could start taking? Of course, we have a debate in math on that issue. Big New York Times story just today about algebra and how this has become somehow a flashpoint. And when should kids be allowed to take algebra? I mean, what are we seeing from the survey? Is there much happening in middle schools as far as we can tell?
Right. I mean, I think that it's difficult because the predominant form of the most common form of gifted or advanced offering in middle school is, again, these part-time pullout programs. So that's elementary and middle school combined. We asked about. So we do see that there's honors stuff that's available in high school, but in elementary and middle school, it's kind of a Rorschach. I mean, is that good? Part-time pullout classes could be great. They could be really intensive. They also could be virtually nothing, and they are in some places, unfortunately. So it's really seeing those different classrooms, different schools for those students is much less common than just seeing cluster grouping or different, asking the teachers to differentiate instruction. And that's so disheartening just because we know what a disservice it is to students and to teachers to treat all the students like they're exactly the same. I really, what Randi and Shari was saying about serving all students really resonated for me because we really have to make sure that everybody's getting what they need. And we know from research that a typical classroom can have a huge range of grade levels represented in it. There's some new stuff from Karen Rambo Hernandez and Scott Peters have done some work on this just in the last couple of years, where they look and see what does an actual classroom have in terms of grade level performance range. And there's a lot of places where it's 5, 6, 7 grade levels that are represented in one classroom. And so treating all those students like they're the same and not giving them, what they need, whether that's something extra supports to get them, because they're a bit behind, or whether that's letting them zoom ahead, it does a disservice to those students, treating them kind of like widgets who are just about the same age. So we should probably give them the same thing. And it also, I think it's probably very difficult for teachers, as you all were alluding to earlier.
Yep. All right. Well, this time is flying by, gang. We only have a few minutes left. Why don't we go in a quick round here and just share your thoughts for folks who are listening and, maybe they now are motivated to try to make sure that all their advanced students are identified and well served. What pieces of advice might you give them? Sheila, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I just want to say that I agree with everybody on the panel that the foundation for a good gifted program is a rich, engaging, inquiry-based, challenging curriculum in general education. And I do think that general education could probably be ratcheted up for a lot of kids for a lot of benefit. And that's the perfect environment to talent spot, to find the kids who could benefit from even more. So I think that you know, we start with a good foundation, and then we select those kids who need more in one subject, need more in two subjects, and we provide them the opportunity to learn with a peer group. Now, we can call that using local norms, or we could just call it elevating. And, you know, to encourage every school in the nation to elevate the top 10, 15% of its students, no matter where they lie on a national standardized continuum of some sort, I think is really what the ultimate goal is, just elevate.
Great. Thank you. Randi?
In general, you know, I think we're all like the Hallelujah chorus here. You know, we believe in kids and we believe in meeting their needs. And what I think we're all saying is, what kind of resources and systems, not systemic and not standardized, systems approach can we use that we notch up what learning looks like right now, very much like what Sheila just said and what Shari is doing in Baldwin. How do we resource that? And then also, how do we make sure for kids who are advanced, we give them what they need? And, you know, and so you can't have one person attempt to do all of it. It has to be resourced, and people have to know what they're doing. But I think Adam's research has been very helpful in this regard. So thank you, Adam.
Fantastic. Thank you. Shari?
I would actually be very simple on this. I don't think it's about more. I don't think it's about better. I think it's about different. I think we achieve everything that you're talking about and everything that we are all talking about when we think about learning, classrooms, the experiences that we give kids differently. It's not about staying on that same trajectory that we've been on forever. It's about going on a parallel one and saying, how do we create learning experiences that are different for young people, that go deeper, that apply critical thinking and problem solving? Because then that differentiation and that acceleration becomes individualized by the student's own desires and abilities. It becomes something we don't have to micromanage. And so I think just, you know, be courageous enough to just do different.
Fantastic. What a great way to end with that. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. I guess you can clap there at home over Zoom for them. Really appreciate Shari, Sheila, Randi, and of course, Adam. This video has been recorded. It will be available on Fordham's YouTube page as well as on our website at fordhaminstitute.org, where you can also find Adam's study, The Broken Pipeline, as well as the final report of the National Working Group on Advanced Education. Again, want to thank our partners at the National Association for Gifted Children, AFT and AASA, and again, our great panel. And thank all of you for joining in today. Hope you found it helpful. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, bye-bye.